Hello and welcome to another video. So I've been examining these different ways of looking from stillness, and today I want to examine what I call not knowing what this is. And this is all about wonder. So what we've been doing so far, so we've had these kind of 9 ways of looking, and so far we've looked at 6. The first 3 ways of looking were connected to trust, like trusting what's here. The next 3 were all about intimacy, what here, or oneness with what's here. And these next 3 are all around wonder. That we wake up to this incredible experience that is completely mysterious. And because of it's mysterious that makes it so wonderful and so beguiling, and to kind of wake up to that. See, what happens is that we replace wonder with a sense of knowing, with our ideas and beliefs and opinions. And that sense of knowing, perhaps we do that because it can seem that doing that can give us a sense of, stability in a universe that would otherwise be, too complex for us. But whatever stability and whatever safety we get through our knowing, we can end up paying way too heavy a price. Particularly when we don't, really realize that our knowing is very, very insubstantial. That, and this kind of comes back to, I think I've mentioned it before in other videos, this idea of literalism. That when we take our beliefs and ideas and opinions to be literally how things are, that means that we end up in this kind of very rigid and stale and very unsatisfying place that really leaves no room for wonder. In fact, from that kind of state, wonder can really seem like a threat. That we want, we want everything to be kind of have a sense that we know what's going on, and it's like there's a part of our, we could say, our psychology learning for that kind of rigidity over life. That even though that kind of bureaucracy of the mind makes life unsatisfying, there's a part of us that kind of wants that, even if it means spending our life in a kind of stale and unsatisfying condition. So a big part of wonder is this recognition that actually our way of thinking about things doesn't actually match our experience. And this is where something like Vipassana meditation, Vipassana Buddhist meditation, or insight meditation, this is where this can be particularly useful. Is a practice like that can start to kind of allow us to see very convincingly how our interpretation of what's happening just does not match what's actually happening. So an example of that is that we have this sense of permanence, but when we actually investigate our experience, it isn't impermanent. There is no permanence. So say if I say something like, I've walked down the stairs, and say I live in a house and every morning I walk down the stairs, I can say, oh yeah, I've walked down the stairs again. But actually, every time I walk down the stairs is a completely unique, never to be repeated experience. That the actual experience itself is this kind of movement of sensation and physical sensation, smells and sights and sounds and feelings that can never ever be repeated. And so I think it was that Greek philosopher, kind of pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, I think it was Heraclitus, who talked about never being able to step in the same river twice. And that's because not only have you changed, but also, so not only has the river changed, but also you've changed every time. That every time you walk down the stairs, not only is it always going to be slightly different, but you've changed because you're never experiencing the stairs independent of the experience. It's kind of part of this bigger experience that involves all your physical sensation, all your, what we call emotions, all your thoughts, your mood, all of that is included in that experience of walking down the stairs, and that's always changing. That's never the same twice. But we kind of mask that by saying something simple like, oh, I'll just walk down the stairs again. And we somehow take that to be the reality when the reality really isn't. The reality is that impermanence of that ever-changing experience. And of course, if we live in a universe where everything is basically just these concepts like walking down the stairs or driving to work or being at work, then of course it starts to become very stale and dissatisfying. So the way back to wonder is to start paying more attention to the parts of our experience that just cannot be labeled. And of course, this is the way back to stillness. This is when we start reckoning that stillness cannot be labeled. But actually, there's the majority, and in fact, eventually this can be started to realize all of our experience can't be labeled. So this can start off as a kind of very simple practice that you just start noticing the bits of your experience that you can't put a label to. What this can lead to eventually, you start to realize, well, actually, all of these labels I was given was basically labels of these small things that I can't put a label to, and that these labels are really meaningless, and that these labels act like, you know, the mystic William Blake would talk about, these mind-forged manacles. It's them that's creating this kind of prison that we end up living in. Not because of life, but because of the way we're chaining our mind to kind of perceive life in a very limited and very inaccurate way. So this not knowing what's here, this is, you know, such a key thing. It doesn't mean that we walk around being, you know, unsafe or something. It's not about not having information, but about understanding the nature of that information. So we can still use all the information we need to kind of go about our daily life, but to kind of at the same time recognize that this is just that what we call our knowing of the world is simply a map. It's simply a way of navigation. And that when we and it's perfectly fine, it's perfectly okay, and it's perfectly wonderful to use those maps. But the mistake we make is when we mistake those maps for what's actually here, when we start to believe that those maps are reality. That's when things start to go wrong. So not knowing what's here means coming back to this much more simplistic and honest way of being. And we can start to see that so many of our issues and so many of our problems, and I would go so far to say all of our issues and problems, are based on things that we think we know. And when we examine those things, we find out that we don't actually know them. We're assuming something. And things that are just assumptions, you know, there's not the same urgency to... So if some question is based on an assumption that you don't actually know is true, it certainly takes some of the urgency out of having to answer that particular question. And in fact, what starts to happen, it's not that a lot of our questions get answered, it's just that they don't need to answer us because they were never really appropriate questions to begin with. Because they're based on assumptions that we just don't know to be true, that we're just kind of, we're just assuming, we're just, you know, that they're based on nothing. And that's why some questions can be so difficult to answer. It's because they are based on assumptions that can never be proven. So if the question is invalid, how can you ever get an answer for a kind of invalid question? And I used to think that peace would come by getting an answer to all the questions that troubled me. But of course, that would just be a set of beliefs, and beliefs can always be kind of taken away, or we can kind of, you know, lose faith in them or whatever. That really what it's about is for those questions to disappear, for those questions to no longer be occurring. They don't have to be answered, they just need to disappear. And they disappear when we kind of see that they're based on nothing. And that what we actually have, what we're experiencing, is completely unknowable. That it's this incredibly mysterious and wonderful happening, and it wants to be recognized as that. And when we do recognize that as that, we feel peace, we feel wonder, we feel this incredible love for life. When we don't do that, we kind of can end up in some very, very dark places. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll speak to you all again soon. Goodbye.